I'd like to convene this meeting of the Standing Committee on Foreign Affairs International Development, and this is to deal with the main estimates. So we'll go through this process for you one more time, because at the end of this meeting we'll move some motions to go through the different votes. So the main estimates 2018-19, votes 1, 5, 10, 15, 20, and L25 under Department of Foreign Affairs, Trade and Development. Vote 1 under International Development Research Center, and vote 1 under International Joint Commission Canadian Section. And before us today to speak to the estimates and to make a presentation is Minister Bibeau. So welcome to the committee. Minister Bibeau has been a regular at our committee, and we very much appreciate that. And as always, colleagues, we'll let the minister make some opening comments, and then we'll get right into questions, which will run for about for an hour, and then we'll turn it after that over to officials. So having said all that, welcome, Minister, and the floor is yours.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chair. Alors, Monsieur le Président, membres du comité.
Mr. Chair, members of the committee, my appearance today is an opportunity for me to present the main estimates to you. I'm accompanied by Arun Tangarash, Chief Financial Officer and Assistant Deputy Minister, and Diane Jacovelas should be here any minute, our Deputy Minister. When I was appointed Minister of International Development and la Francophonie, you know what the Prime Minister asked me to do. It was to redirect international assistance to the poorest and most vulnerable people, including fragile states, and I was to hold consultations with Canadian stakeholders from international organizations that focus on international and humanitarian assistance, to create a new policy and funding framework to direct Canada's decisions in the area of aid, and to empower people and to foster sustainable development in developing countries. I'm very proud of the Feminist International Assistance Policy of Canada, launched in June of last year after a year of consultation. This policy seeks to eliminate poverty and to build a more peaceful, inclusive, and prosperous world. It has been shown that gender equality and empowering women and girls is the most effective way to reach this goal. The 5th Sustainable Development Goal, which is to foster gender equality and to empower women and girls, and it is at the heart of Canada's approach in the implementation of the Sustainable Development Program heading towards 2030, and it will bring all other goals forward as well. Canada is taking action.
National Assistance Policy was launched last June. The Government of Canada has committed a 3-year, $650 million investment to scale up the number of women and adults and girls who have access to sexual and reproductive health and rights services. This will help make contraception available to 120 million women and adolescent girls. This funding also supports organizations that help to prevent gender-based violence and harmful practices, such as child early and forced marriage and female genital mutilation cutting. We also announced $150 million to strengthen women's rights organizations and movements through the Women's Voice and Leadership Program. We want to reach the poorest and most marginalized women and reach more women at the grassroots level. This will help ensure that more women take part in leadership and decision-making. In some cases, women are putting themselves in danger by speaking out. Canada must support the efforts of these women and girls and give women the platforms, tools, and protection they need to make their voice heard. Beyond these efforts, we will also increase the number of girls who complete elementary and high school. How? First, last February, I announced funding of $180 million over 3 years for the Global Partnership for Education. We want to improve the ability of women-owned businesses and farmers to be part of value chains. And we also want to enhance women's land, labor, inheritance, and property rights. We will also support initiatives that bolster resilience to climate change and increase the number of people working in green technologies and climate-smart agriculture. Increase the ability of women to hold leadership positions in public life. Transform Canada's humanitarian assistance to a more gender-responsive way. Je partage vos inquiétudes et celles des Canadiens
I share your concerns and those of Canadians in regards to situations faced by people in Africa, in the Caribbean, South America, the Middle East, and Asia, such as the situation of the Rohingya. The humanitarian situation of the Rohingya in Myanmar and Bangladesh is horrible and catastrophic from a security point of view. Canada was one of the first countries to respond to this humanitarian crisis.
Donc, le Canada a été un des
Canada was one of the first countries to respond to the humanitarian crisis. Since the beginning of 2017, Canada has given $45.9 million in humanitarian aid to meet the needs of people affected by the crisis. Last May, we launched a multi-year strategy with a $300 million contribution over 3 years to meet humanitarian needs and to foster development and the stabilization of the region in a rapid and coordinated fashion. Making our humanitarian aid more responsive to people is one of the goals of our policy. This policy is being applied in Bangladesh and Myanmar.
When I visited, there were only 2 specialized centers to help survivors of sexual abuse. So we decided to support provision of information and services in 20 more. Our action helped to mobilize additional support within the international community. Today, there are a total of 39 safe spaces for women in Cox's Bazar. J'aimerais maintenant revenir sur l'enveloppe de l'aide internationale.
I would now like to talk about international assistance, which is supporting the whole-of-government approach to international assistance. 16 departments and federal organizations are working together on international assistance priorities. The main estimates of 2018-19 include funding of $3.9 billion for the Peace, Development, and Security Program, including an increase of $80 million to have quicker responses to unexpected global crises, an increase of $108 million for the 2015-2020 strategy for the Maternal, Newborn, and Infant Health Initiative, an increase of $36.7 million for the Global Fund against AIDS, tuberculosis, and malaria.
Implementation of the Feminist International Assistance Policy, including an additional $2 billion over 5 years, starting in 2018-2019, to strengthen the impact of Canada's Feminist International Assistance Policy and advance our international leadership in key areas, and $1.5 billion in funding over 5 years, starting 2018-2019, in support of innovation in Canada's international assistance. Recognizing that government donors cannot meet the Sustainable Development Goals, or SDGs, needs alone, our government will continue to explore new partnerships and innovative approaches that will mobilize private capital for sustainable development. To conclude, through Canada's Feminist International Assistance Policy and the significant investments announced in Budget 2018, Canada is better positioned to help the poorest and most vulnerable and contribute to building a more peaceful, inclusive, and prosperous world. Mr. Chair, colleagues, thank you.
Merci, Madame Bibeau. We're going to start with
Thank you, Ms. Bibeau.
Thank you, Minister, and welcome to the committee. Had the pleasure to travel with you to Africa a couple of months ago, and thanks for the whole trip. My first question is, large number of your planned results in the department plan have not established a target. Somehow this is left blank under the guise and obtaining baseline information. But I find it difficult having all these talented people and incredibly talented civil service servants that you're not able to make an educated approximation on some of these baselines. For example, the target for percentage of targeted organizations that advocate for the rights of women, children, marginalized groups, or at-risk populations left blank, this whole area. So does your department really know how many are being targeted and how many you expect to succeed?
Thank you. I just want to be sure that I understand your question correctly. So you're talking about the results and the indicators that we have set to as a result of what we expect from the Feminist International Assistance Policy, and you gave one specific example. Is it okay?
There is a
Yes.
specific area left blank in the department planning report, which the area that target the percentage of targeted organizations that advocate for the rights of women, children, marginalized groups, or at-risk population. So that whole area is left blank. And I'm puzzled. I mean, I believe that you have talented resources at the ministry to at least be able to give us some kind of estimation on that. Can you explain why and how many, if you know the answer, how many of these targets will be expected to succeed?
So maybe I can just introduce, and Aaron will be more specific. Just to tell you that we have developed a result framework attached to the Feminist International Assistance Policy with different outcomes and output depending on some are focusing on really the intervention that we are making, and others are higher level because we know that we're not the only one to intervene in a country. I have to agree that we are still looking for some baseline, because when we were not measuring certain specific area or action, it was not measured by the department before because it was not something of interest before. So we have mandated a group to make a study and clarify some of the baseline for all of our Feminist International Assistance Policy results framework. But I believe Aaron has something more specific to say.
I think you answered the question better than I did. But so in the departmental plan, that's based on the new departmental results framework. And in setting up the departmental results framework, we went to each result area. So one of the areas that we were targeting is enhancing the empowerment and rights of women and girls. And as soon as we do that, we say, now how best to measure that? And so we established a performance target, as you said, is what are the organizations that we target through our programming that represent and advocate for that. And so right now there is no indicator, that we don't have the data. So what we've as part of setting that indicator up, we've said the data source is our financial system as well as our project management reporting tool where we can capture that. So what we're doing now is we're trying to find what the baseline indicator is for that specific performance indicator. And once we get the baseline, then we can set the target.
But how can you walk to this area without having at least some benchmarks to measure? Although you have, as I said earlier, you have those talented individuals and resources in the ministry that should be able to tell you. I mean, I don't know how you walk into this without any, at least clarification or clear path how you're going to move forward.
So in establishing the indicator, the first thing we say is there, what becomes meaningful to measure against this target? And so, as you stated, the percentage of organizations that we target that do this is a meaningful indicator. But this is a very new area for us in terms of targeting organizations specifically to enhance the empowerment of women and girls. So what we had to do is look at our data sources and to see how we capture that information, and to, first of all, to establish the benchmark before we do the target. So a lot of it is the underlying data work behind the indicator. I think we're certain, and there was a rigorous process in getting to the indicator, and we do know that we can capture the data, but we don't have what the benchmark ought to be in there for the target.
Well, that's what led me to be concerned. To be honest with you, it seems like, and before I say that, I think there was initiatives before, Muskoka initiatives, for example, on newborn and women, and mothers, that was established some base. And I don't think that you've done so much difference since then, except just changing the labeling of the whole thing. My question to you, I hope that this is not a political calculation by any kind, because we are, after 2.5 years, almost moving to 3 years, we're expecting those measures to be in place, and we expect some result. I mean, taxpayers need to see, and we need to know where we're going with this policy that we've been talking. I mean, the government been talking about for the last 2.5, 3 years.
Well, it's impossible to have baselines when we are starting on something brand new because it was clearly not a priority for the previous government to work on women's rights and all these things and working with local women organizations in the field. So we have taken the time to work with our partners, Canadian, international, local, to develop this feminist policy. We have worked very hard on our framework results, and this framework results is well aligned with the SDGs as well. And yes, we are still missing some baselines because it was not in the way the department used to work. So we are in the process of getting those, and I mean, these remains our priorities.
We'll now go to Mr. Rezniewski, please.
Thank you, Chair. Minister, Canada and Ukraine have a very strong bilateral relationship, and we've been among the most steadfast international supporters of Ukraine's democratic and economic reform processes. Since Russia's military invasions of Ukrainian territory in 2014, Canada's contributed $240 million in development assistance and $400 million in low-interest loans. Much of Canada's aid intended to bring relief to eastern Ukraine, that's where it's mostly directed, towards the 1.8 million internally displaced, 3.5 million dependent upon aid, and 250,000 children living in an active war zone, one of the most landmined regions of the planet. And perhaps just to, these are astoundingly large numbers, 250,000 children living in an active war zone in Europe. Let me humanize it. Daria Kazimirova, a 15-year-old girl, last week did a series of social media posts, and soon afterwards she was hit by an Russian artillery shell, and was killed. Last year, I welcomed on the Hill Mykola Nizhnikovsky, an 11-year-old boy who the Shriners of Montreal brought to fit with prosthetics because he lost both legs and an arm, and lost his brother when they picked up a grenade just outside of their town. That's the real human cost, and the numbers are astounding. Canada must continue to help the people of Ukraine. Canadians have called upon the Government of Canada to commit to maintaining the funding for international development assistance to Ukraine at the present level of $50 million per year, increasing funding when necessary. Could you please provide us with an update how the government will meet this particular goal?
Yes, thank you, and I know that you're a strong supporter for the Ukrainian community, and I appreciate it. Yes, you're right, we are amongst the strongest international supporters to Ukraine's, and we intend to continue to be, to implement the democratic and economic reforms. We are in the process after the policy of looking at all the countries where we are and how the vision for each of these countries. And I can reassure you that Ukraine remains top of the list, and we will be strongly supporting the country and the reforms. We are just about to launch a call for proposals. That will be quite, there will be different possibility for the organization, international and Canadian, to provide proposal, as long as it's really well aligned with the feminist policy and mainly the good governance and gender equality and all of these priorities. And actually, I intend to visit Ukraine next month. So this is just also to show you that we stay strongly committed to this country, and we will continue in terms of development and assisting the government, and as well as providing humanitarian assistance for those you were talking about.
Thank you, Minister, and thank you for that support. I wish you a very informative and visit to Ukraine, and I hope that you might visit the Federal Police Force. Canada, after the Revolution for Dignity, was a country that took on rebuilding Ukraine's Federal Police Force, which had been the least respected institution of government in Ukraine and was completely disbanded. It was our officers, women from Canada, from the RCMP, from Montreal's police force, who went to Ukraine, rebuilt the police force, and is now one of the most respected institutions in the country, and approximately 30% of the police force are women. Minister, I'd like to move on to another question. Canada's been internationally lauded for introducing the Feminist International Assistance Policy. This committee has begun a study on the situation in 3 African countries who've been affected by long-term violent conflict: Somalia, South Sudan, and the Democratic Republic of Congo. In all 3 countries, women suffered disproportionately, and many continue to be victimized to this day. Within these countries, there's a window of opportunity for Canada to make a difference in peace building and stabilization in support of UN Resolution 1325 on women, peace, and security. What is Canada doing to apply the Feminist International Assistance Policy to help women affected by war and civil conflict in Somalia, South Sudan, and the DRC?
Can we have that answer in about a minute?
Okay, the short version of it. I visited South Sudan and DRC, and I could witness, the very difficult situation for women, especially when we talk about gender-based violence. For maybe some concrete example, in South Sudan, Canada has been instrumental in bringing women into discussions of peace and security and the formal peace process through targeted campaigns in social and traditional media and advocacy events. In DRC, I'll make it short. En République démocratique du Congo, donc les activités du Canada dans le secteur.
Canada's activity in this area focus on sexual and gender-based violence, and it's similar in Somalia. And another example for South Sudan.
Capacity of the media in South Sudan on gender-sensitive reporting. So I would be glad to speak more about it at another moment.
Thank you, Mr. Madame Lavadière, s'il vous plaît.
Merci beaucoup, Monsieur le Président.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair. Thank you, Minister, for being with us this afternoon. Minister, the percentage of the GDP that Canada contributes to international assistance is at an historic low. We don't even meet a third of our international commitments, and it looks rather bad in comparison with countries like Norway, which would also like a seat at the UN Security Council the same year as Canada, which has reached 1.1%. So do you have a plan to meet our international commitments? At this time, Canada's percentage is 0.26%, and when I did consultations, our partners asked 3 things. They asked for a good policy, for leadership, and more money. Good policy, I feel a great deal of satisfaction with our feminist policy. Leadership, we're taking it in different areas for the protection of women and the rights of women and girls, and teens in particular. In Bangladesh, with the Rohingya crisis as well, we've been one of the first countries to respond with a 3-year plan now. So we are demonstrating leadership there as well. And in terms of money, we agree official development aid remains an extremely important factor in meeting sustainable development goals. We've committed to adding $2 billion over 5 years to meet the priorities of the policy, $1.5 billion for innovation initiatives in development, and we are making efforts with the Development FinDec Institute that's begun its first project recently. So it's not official development assistance, but it's still Canadian money being used as a lever for private investment for development. We've also supported an initiative of the Bank of Montreal, WIFI, an initiative to encourage women entrepreneurs. Canada contributed $20 million for an initiative that's seeking $1 billion, and the first initiative was $1.6 billion. We are trying in different ways, recognizing that official development aid is essential, but we're also trying to leverage it. And at that pace, Minister, in what year will Canada meet its international commitments? I don't have an answer to give you, I'm sorry. Okay, thank you. Regarding Ukraine, once again, I met with representatives from Ukrainian communities a number of months ago, and there were many projects underway that were sunsetting in January or February of this year. There were many concerns raised in that regard. I'm not asking for an answer today necessarily, but would it be possible for the committee to know, since September, let's say, September 2017, what new projects have been announced and what projects have been renewed? Very specifically, no, but I'll get back to you. Yes. Yes. If you could send that information to the committee, it would be greatly appreciated. Yes, with pleasure. And I can tell you that it's our goal to maintain the same level of engagement year over year. When we look at humanitarian assistance, development, peace and security, we want to be at that $50 million level, maintain the same amount as previous years. Great. In June 2013, there was a merger of CIDA with Foreign Affairs and Trade and Development to create the new department. Since that was done, since 2013, how has the organizational structure of the department changed? Do you have concrete examples of initiatives where trade, development, diplomacy, traditional diplomacy have come together to create a new dynamic? Thank you. I wasn't there for the transition, but I used to work at CIDA. And when I started working here, I thought I would receive a lot of requests to renew CIDA, but it didn't happen. I think people had gotten used to it. People were working together. And what I see as one of the advantages is that in all countries now, not only in developing countries, there are people who are responsible for development. That allows us to raise awareness among our colleagues in different respects. And when it's a geographic department, there's closer collaboration between people from trade, people from development, and foreign affairs. It seems that it's been an enriching experience and that it's allowed us to be more effective because we know the areas even better. My colleagues experienced it, so I don't know if they'd like to add something, but I've only heard that it's going well. Good afternoon. It's working. The way it works is that we have the ministers who are each responsible for foreign affairs, trade, and development. Same thing for us as deputy ministers, but below us, all of the managers of the department try to take into account different issues when they prepare their recommendations. But we've maintained expertise in trade, development, and foreign affairs to ensure that our projects continue to be successful. For example, one thing for trade that Canadian companies say is that it's important to have an enabling environment so that there's a rule of law and rules are followed. In the area of development, we do that as well, ensuring that there's a governance system in place in countries. So sometimes it's easy for us to work together to see what's preventing investments in a country. For example, in Africa, having more investment would help them with their economic growth. And we're also very concerned about ensuring that economic growth is inclusive, so we try to work closely as colleagues. A country like South Sudan, development goes hand in hand with peace and security, with everything that's happening there. So we're really trying to be consistent in our development and political messages in order to ensure that we're heading in the right direction. For development, I think we want to ensure that our expertise at CIDA, which was excellent, continues to be excellent within the new department. Thank you, Ms. Laverdière. Ms. Vandenbeld, please.
And my question is actually specifically about the estimates. I noticed that in the estimates, there is no specifically designated line item for international election observation. And just looking at, I mean, I know that there are one-off projects. We can do it through embassies, through international assistance, through the Peace Ops program. And the minister yesterday was very clear that we are planning on funding the Ukraine and other elections. However, there used to be a program, and it was called the Multi-Year Election Observation Program, the MEOP program, under the old CETA. But when it amalgamated, and when Minister Baird was the Minister of Foreign Affairs, he actually canceled that program and created a section that was under the Stabilization and Reconstruction Task Force, but there was no money, no human resources. So election, at that point, there was no money specifically set aside, and there hasn't been since. We changed it in 2016 to the Peace and Stabilization Operations Program, the Peace Ops program, but since it wasn't really a fit, it actually isn't there anymore, which means it's a little bit orphaned. It really is something that's a development type of thing, and we also know that for outcomes for women and girls, if there is full political participation, free and fair elections. It's a precondition to the Sustainable Development Goals. It's a way of ensuring that we have democracy and free elections so that we do increase marginalized groups' outcomes. So my question to you is whether you would be willing to, especially with the increase in our Feminist International Assistance envelope, to use some of that funding to re-establish a program that's specifically designated with the expertise, the in-house knowledge, the coordination. You know, democracy, election observation isn't something you can just do. You do have to have that kind of expertise in-house. Would you be willing to consider recreating some kind of program that's similar to the original MEOP program?
I agree that it's something very important, and it fits very well under our area of expertise, which is good governance or inclusive governance, definitely. So the way we, I look at it is more, okay, after the feminist policy, we are, I think I started talking about it before, we are looking at the vision, the Canadian vision of our intervention in each of the country where we are. So it's more during this exercise that we are considering if in one country or another, Canada is well positioned to play a more active role during election. And obviously Ukraine, I would say Haiti as well, are two big example of where we are actively involved when there is election. So I would say that during the consultation, this is not something that, you know, was raised as really a priority, but it's definitely eligible. I mean, not as loud as other things, okay? But we recognize the benefit, and it's definitely eligible. So I'm not at the point of creating something very special, but depending on the country, it's definitely an area of interest.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you, Minister, for taking the time out on your busy schedule. If I remember right, you came in front of the committee last September and talked about development of financial institution. And what I understood at that time, the main goal of DFI were economic development through job creation, economic empowerment for women, and climate change mitigation. We know that Canada and its feminist international assistance policy has been very well received in terms of progressive development. Can you inform the committee how DFI is progressing and making positive changes in combating poverty and economic growth?
So we're still at the early stage, but FinDev has been created. It's up and running in Montreal. The CEO has been hired and the closest team, so around Mr. Lamontagne. We have financed the first project earlier this year, which is MCOPA. It's a Kenyan, I'll say the exact name of the project, a pay-as-you-go energy provider off-grid homes that connects more than 500,000 households on solar energy. So it's really a project that meet our two priorities, one being really contributing to women economic empowerment, and the other one considering climate change and then new technologies and green technologies. So this is the first one we have supported through the DFI. It's an investment of $10 million. And it's worth notice that this company employs 800 people in Kenya, and 52% of the employees are women. So in addition to the benefit that will be brought to the community that will get this energy, solar energy, with the project.
Thank you so much.
Thank you very much.
Thanks, Chair.
I really like that project, by the way. Mr. Sani, you're on.
Bonjour, Madame la Ministre.
Good afternoon, Minister. The serious crisis in Myanmar is a global crisis that requires an international response. Crimes against humanity and ethnic cleansing have led over 717,000 Rohingya to flee their homes in Rakhine, Myanmar, to head to the neighboring country, Bangladesh. The situation continues to worsen. More and more Rohingya are crossing the border to Bangladesh every day. Can you explain what the new strategy of Canada is to protect the Rohingya? Thank you. And thank you for asking your question in French. We were one of the first countries to respond in August and September of last year with the matching fund as well. We've contributed $46 million in addition to the $12 million that Canadians contributed through the matching fund. And recently we announced a 3-year plan. It was the first time we did it for Syria, the second time we've done it for the Rohingya crisis, because it's part of good practices in development to offer our partners an opportunity to work over a multi-year period. So $300 million over 3 years. The bulk of that money will be for humanitarian aid for the Rohingya community in Bangladesh, but also the host community. I went there myself and I visited Cox's Bazar. I had one-on-one conversations with Rohingya women. It's a critical situation, and there's violence before, during, and after. It's still very difficult in the camps. They're overcrowded, and there's possible flooding and landslides, and it's a very serious situation. Basic care, basic needs in Cox's Bazar will be met, and then the Rohingya communities that are still in Myanmar as well, and the host community, as I've said. There's another aspect. And that would be seeking justice. Assistance for fact-finding missions. You know what it's like. So a fact-finding mission, and that's very important as well. If we want to meet the recommendations of Kofi Annan and Bob Rae's reports for the return of the Rohingya, there's a whole justice aspect. Those who are guilty need to be brought to trial. People need to feel that justice is being done. So we'd be contributing to those missions. That's an important aspect of our assistance. And there's the aspect of international cooperation as well. I'm pleased to say that last week at the G7 development meeting, it's a discussion we had. We agreed to use this crisis to work even more collaboratively and to implement our commitment to having a gender transformative approach that takes into account gender equality, empowering women in humanitarian contexts. That means that beyond food and water, the real basic needs, we'd be looking at the needs of women, teens, girls, not just seeing them as victims, but also seeing how we can work with them, consult them, have them participate in decision making, help them develop skills and leadership so they can really contribute to the life of the community. So they'd have new skills when they return to normal life.
Okay. Welcome, Minister. And I'd like to ask you about a disturbing issue we have heard regarding humanitarian employees abusing their authority. I know this is a difficult issue, but one that I think is important to discuss. I'm referring to reports and allegations concerning employees of Oxfam UK, but other allegations show that this is sadly not an incident isolated to a single NGO or a single place. While I firmly believe that the vast majority of humanitarian workers do their jobs in very difficult environments and often under dangerous circumstances with the utmost integrity, these stories tarnish their work and the confidence of the public in these humanitarian groups. Can you describe what the government has done to ensure that safeguards are in place to make sure that this is not happening with Canadian humanitarian organizations?
Merci. Thanks for recognizing that most of the humanitarian and development workers are there for the good reason and really dedicated and putting their health and even life at risk sometimes. So when this event came back in the media, because it was something that happened in 2011, I immediately reached out with the Oxfam Quebec and Oxfam Canada CEO to investigate and see what was the situation, if we were involved, and so they knew about this fact since then, and they had already taken significant measures to improve their procedures, to prevent, to train, and to act in such cases. So I was, I was reassured to start with, and then the same week, I called for a meeting with 10 or 12 of our main humanitarian Canadian organizations to have this discussion, to share best practices, to identify the gaps so we can close these gaps. And so we are actually working on these with them, with the department, to see how can we share these best practices and identify the gaps. The other step will also be to make sure that the small and medium organization also have the resources to undertake such prevention action, have these procedures, have a line where someone can call in a safe way, how to support the person who called, and how to prosecute the one who's face allegations. So I was reassured that we were already in a good position, but we can always do better. I'm not blind. I mean, I think in every industry we have people who behave inappropriately. But we are in a situation where we deal with the poorest and the most vulnerable. So we have to be even stronger. And we also had this conversation at the G7 again. And we agreed, us as well, to share practices to support the UN Secretary General, because we all share the zero tolerance approach or stand. And I would say that one thing that is a bit difficult is to find how we will avoid having one predator being hired by another one. So because we cannot work with a blacklist because of our privacy, law, and so we are thinking about other mechanisms, a humanitarian passport, or anyway, we're considering different other approaches. But this is something that we want to work together on internationally, because humanitarian and development workers work for one and another, So we are all working very hard. I would say especially UK and us, Canada, are really taking the lead on this situation, because we don't want this to happen.
Merci, Madame Ministre. Mr. Abdulatif,
Thank you, Chair. I would share my time with my colleague, Mr. Janis. The question is, Minister, there's no secret that we have a flood of illegal border crossers over the last years and plus. And as the Minister of International Development, what direct intervention you had with your counterparts on the from the countries of origins of these queue jumpers in order to help create solutions at the source?
They are not queue jumpers because they do not process through the same mechanisms. And actually, it's more the Minister of Immigration, my colleague, who went to Nigeria recently, to give you one specific example, because the last influx of refugees asylum seekers was coming from Nigeria, and I understand that he's having very productive meetings in Nigeria and in the United States to face the situation. But this question, this question is really for my colleague, the Minister of Immigration, I believe.
There is the development side, there's the humanitarian side in that. Have you been involved at all in the overall picture of this whole discussion?
I'm not involved as the Minister of International Development.
Well,
Are you talking about the asylum seekers who are coming to Canada? Is that, or I did not get your question right, maybe?
No, we're talking about the illegal crossers, border crossers that have been coming lately to Canada in hundreds. And there must, I'm sure that the government, you're working with the counterparts on the other side of the country of origin of these border crossers. Have you had any role in that, or just was the role of the immigration minister?
No, it's the Minister of Immigration who had direct conversation on this subject.
Okay, thanks.
Thank you. First of all, Minister, just a comment for me. I think you know that Rona Ambrose in particular, but other members of the previous government were very actively engaged in the promotion of women's rights around the world. It was Minister Ambrose's initiative, our former leader, not at the time, but later, championing the creation of International Day of the Girl, very vocal on issues like early and forced marriages, supporting economic opportunities for women. And I appreciate the fact that much of this work is a positive example of continuity over the course of governments, and I think it serves all of us better when people don't try and turn that into a partisan issue, because I think we do have a consensus when it comes to advocating for women's rights around the world, and I'm proud of the fact that that's part of a legacy that all of us are involved in, and certainly I know you wouldn't want to diminish the good work on these issues of people like Rona Ambrose. But I wanted to ask you a question about UNRWA. I had an opportunity recently to visit an UNRWA school in the Palestinian territories in the West Bank. And I was there as part of the Canada-Palestine Interparliamentary Friendship Group. And I know that the previous government had concerns about some of the things that were happening through UNRWA. And your government has taken a very different approach with respect to UNRWA. I guess what struck me visiting this school was that it is geographically extremely close to an Israeli settlement. And we asked the students there if there is any contact that takes place between the students at that school and students that are close by. And they told us no, they didn't have that contact, they didn't want to have that contact. And the teachers were kind of nodding along approvingly while these comments were being made. And I don't fault the children for the feelings that they're having in this situation. Obviously, it's a very tense situation, but people want to know, in terms of curriculum, in terms of programs that encourage peaceful coexistence and pluralism, whether the messages that people are getting in schools that are funded by Canadians are encouraging intercommunal harmony, peaceful coexistence, goodwill towards each other, or whether those students are getting messages through their school that are maintaining or even enhancing those tensions. So I wonder if you could comment on that with respect to UNRWA. What steps the government has taken to actually ensure that Canadian tax dollars are being spent in a way that is fully aligned with Canadian values?
Thank you for the question. I think we all recognize that UNRWA is working in a particularly difficult environment. And I understand your concern, and actually we share your concern, and we have a very, very close relation or communication, should I say, with the UNRWA direction. It's at least on a weekly basis, if not even more, because we really want to follow up on, and then especially the curriculum, the school curricula, because we know it's an issue in this particular environment. We have to remember as well that when we support UNRWA, a part of it goes to education, health, and basic services, and it's not only in Palestine; it's also in Syria, Jordan, and Lebanon as well. And as I said in the beginning, my mandate is to focus on the poorest and the most vulnerable, and definitely the Palestinian refugees are among those. So yes, I'm following up, and I'm very, very attentive, careful to the matter.
Thank you, Mr. Janis. Madame Vandenbel, please.
Yes, thank you.
Last questions.
Thank you very much, Minister. And following up on the theme of my previous question with regard to democratic development, as we mentioned, we know that women thrive, and the Sustainable Development Goals are achieved when you have open, pluralistic, inclusive democratic processes. And a lot of the expertise that Canada has, and in my past, that was one of the things that I was doing abroad, is in institutional development, parliaments, rule of law, making sure that we have strong democratic institutions around the world, which Canadians are particularly good at doing. I'm wondering, my understanding, the All-Party Democracy Caucus recently had a forum where we brought in experts, former UNDP, people from around the world that work in this field, Parliamentary Centre and others, who said that at the moment, and I don't know if this is true, but at the moment only 2% of ODA goes to institutional development for democracy. And I'm just wondering if that's something that we might be able to consider, because we know the feminist international assistance policy doesn't mean that we stop doing things like democracy promotion and electoral observation. It just means that we want to have more women participating and included and designing those kinds of programs. But the programs themselves actually achieve the kind of outcomes for women and girls that we're looking for. So I'm not asking for an answer right now in terms of the percentage, but just in general, in terms of the governance and the inclusive governance that you're doing, would you be willing to take a look at the percentage that is specifically, not for civil society participation or, but specifically for institutional development on democracy?
Yes, I'll take a look and I'll get back to you. And I think my answer will be similar as the previous one. It really, the area of priority, which is inclusive governance, really is very well aligned. And actually, when I was doing this consultation, and I traveled quite a bit, as you know, every time I met with one of my counterparts in the developing countries, I was asking, okay, you've been doing working with the Canadian cooperation for 50 years. Tell me, what are we good at? How are we? Can we have a bigger impact in the field? And the first thing they were all saying was technical assistance. They really appreciate Canadians, having Canadians around for that type of assistance.
And I know that a lot of Canadians are working for American organizations. So, for instance, NDI, IRI, or with international intergovernmental organizations, UNDP has a strong parliamentary development section. OSCE, everywhere that we go, Canadians are actually in senior positions when it comes to this kind of institutional capacity, technical development. Canada doesn't have that kind of, the National Endowment for Democracy or NDI or an organization specifically like that. And I know 10 years ago this committee did a study on that. I have a motion before the committee to renew that study. But just wondering if I could get your thoughts on whether or not there's room for Canada to perhaps look at the way in which we do democracy promotion around the world, and maybe there is a way that Canadians could be working for a Canadian organization with our own values, as opposed to, it's good that we're working in organizations around the world or U.S. organizations, but is there perhaps some space for the Parliamentary Centre, and others are already doing this, I know, but what are your thoughts about that particular thing?
My thoughts are this. To me, this is once again related to the way Canada is working in different countries. So in some countries, it's could be very, very much interesting. Creating something new. I mean, I'll be honest with you, this is not something that we have really pushed, and I haven't got. It has been identified as an area of priorities, but really creating something new, I'm not at this place right now.
Okay, perhaps the committee will study it and then we can give you some recommendations. Thank you.
Well, if you identify it as a priority, I will definitely consider it even further. Yes.
Thank you, Minister. I appreciate that.
We've got a couple of minutes left. Mr. Janice or Mr. Aboutif. Quickly, one question.
Yeah, Minister, peace and security is one of the areas that Canadian government has identified as under the international assistance program. We have a situation in China. China has been increasingly belligerent to its neighbors. How much aid have we allocated for Taiwan, like for places like Vietnam, within the development in South China Sea? Is there any money, anything that you've allocated there to help these countries push back against China's militarization and action in the area?
The only thing we have in China is and correct me if I'm wrong, but it's the CFLI, so the little fund that is really managed by the embassy to support local initiatives. So I don't have the amount in front of me, but actually, yes, I do. 200. We're talking about programming. It's sorry. So
I'll take 200.
Yeah, so it's the local initiative funds are small amount of money for local initiative. This is the name of the. But when you're talking about Vietnam, yes, we do have a development program in Vietnam, but I don't believe it, and it answers. I mean, it meets the criteria you mentioned. Do you want to add something?
Thank you.
Colleagues, that wraps up our hour with the Minister. I want to thank her very much for her presentation and the questions on the estimates. Very much appreciate it. Well done, everyone. We'll take a small break and then we'll go to the officials. So just take a few minutes and then we'll go from there. Colleagues, we'll bring this meeting back to order. We'll now go to the Department of Foreign Affairs and Trade and Development officials. So I understand we have Shirley Crothers, and Arun is back in his regular spot. So it'll be the two of you, right? Okay. So, colleagues, we've got about 40 minutes. And then we're going to need some time for some motions. There's a number of motions that I need to put to you, and I understand Mr. Aboutif has a motion he'd like to present at some point in that discussion. So let's roll it along so we go straight to questions. And the way it works is Mr. Aboutif leads off. So Zaid, the floor is yours.
With the motion?
No.
With the questions directly? Okay. Yes.
Directly, yep.
Yes, I can do that. Well, thank you very much again, and you've been here already for the first hour. The question is around AIIB. Canada has decided to basically participate in the AIIB, and we learned that AIIB is funding projects like coal-firing power plants, and that's something that basically against the advocation of the government right now on the climate change and all this green energy and policy. So how much you know about the investment that AIIB is doing, and do you agree that we shouldn't be protesting at least over what they're doing on this end, and how we're going to deal with such thing?
So my involvement with the Asian Infrastructure Bank is very, very limited. So we have, at the time of the announcement and the setup, we were to ensure that the budget announcement and the paid-in capital of about $199 million US was paid. Unfortunately, I don't have any information on the project pipeline in terms of what they have approved. So in terms of the type of investments they've approved to date or funded, I have very high-level figures of the total amount of loans or contributions they've made, but I don't have specific information.
So
on
the
investments.
$199 million US have already been paid?
Over 5 years.
Over 5 years.
That's correct.
But I thought the commitment was larger than that.
It is. So,
and what about the rest of what was the balance?
So the commitment was larger, and shares become available at certain times. So we were authorized. I can't remember the amount offhand, but it was $199 million of shares that were authorized that we have purchased at this point. So we have authorization to purchase more, and that's what the Canada's committed to, but the Asian Infrastructure Bank has only made available to Canada at this point $199 million US.
So on their future plans, is what they're giving us already is just this amount of money that we can put forward. They didn't ask for more, or they didn't expect more, or they're not allowing more. What's exactly the situation?
That I don't have the details on.
You don't have. So in order to know, we probably there's a mechanism in place, and I think this is a concerning area among others. What's the action plan when it comes to the ministry on in this whole dynamic to at least obtain and explain what's going on from that? And given the fact that we're given $199 million US, which is about $250 million Canadian already.
Sorry? Oh, sorry. In terms of what our role is, I'd have to get back to you in terms of how we as a department, the role that we play in terms of the oversight on those investments.
I think that the whole reason here of my question is that now there's a carbon tax on Canadians. Canadians have to pay carbon tax on just to help reduce the emissions and to help implement the climate change policy. And here we're sending $199 million US dollars into AIIB, who's doing projects that really against that policy, that goes against actually the current of what we're doing. So the question is, in your opinion, as official, is this fair to Canadians?
So what I can tell you, what I do know about what the infrastructure plan is for, right? So the plan was looking at green and cross-border infrastructure, transport, energy, and other such projects. Other than that, I can't comment further whether those investments are good or not, right? Or whether they're, all I can do is I can tell you from the information that I have is what the intention of the fund is and the level of Canada's investment.
So in your department, in your ministry, who is responsible just to monitor what's happening in specific on this file?
I would have to get back to you on who the precise official is who's responsible.
Yeah, it would be nice. Shirley, would you like to comment on this at all? No, you don't. Okay. I'll move on to another question. We know that, again, I mean, $2.6 billion were committed to climate financing over the coming years for developing nations to transition into greener economies. On the other side, the government just purchased a pipeline for $4.5 billion. So is this practice an area where the government would go again to basically repeat this in areas where we committed $2.65 billion to fix climate situations and to help climate issues to improve? Do you see any difference in? I mean, are we to repeat this overseas since we've done it here? Out of the $2.65 billion?
I didn't get your question, sorry.
The question is, we've committed $2.65 billion for climate financing to other countries to help to assist climate change. And then here we are, government purchased a pipeline for $4.5 billion. Is this type of policy going to repeat elsewhere? If there's one of those countries that we're supposed to help to assist for greener energy, they request, or there's a plan to go on a similar project that we're doing here. Would you support that? Would you think that one area can be tackled?
So, for the $2.65 billion, the type of financing that we provide through that is very, very specific, and it's for climate mitigation and adaptation projects. For example, clean technology, climate smart agriculture projects, forestry. And so the nature of what is contemplated to be funded through those and through our partners is predefined by that policy. So it's hard for me to comment beyond what the policy allows or contemplates for funding through that funding window or through that policy.
Thank you, Mr. Aboutif. I appreciate your line of questioning, but I don't think these public servants can give you the answer vis-a-vis the domestic policy on the pipeline. But I appreciate your question nonetheless. Madame Vandenbeld, please.
Yes, thank you very, very much. And just following on the question I asked the minister, we saw that when the amalgamation happened between CETA and what's now Global Affairs, it seems that some of the programs got lost. So, for instance, the MEOP program, the one on electoral observation, had been funded over, I think, between 2008 and 2013. It was funded about $20 million specifically for that program. And then it moved over in 2013. And so under the previous government, under Minister Baird, it lost all its funding. Still sat somewhere, but are there other examples of programs that when things were amalgamated that didn't really fit in one area or another and perhaps ended up orphaned the same way that electoral observation did?
I'm trying to think of that, to think of any examples, and none of them really come to mind. So at the time of amalgamation, what happened essentially was two departments were essentially just stitched together. And there were certain programs that fell, for example, election observations might have fallen in the peace and security area, but the development programs that were very, very clearly development stayed intact. And what was done in terms of how we managed our finances is we created a special fund for anything that was tagged against development. So we can monitor and track development expenditures to ensure they continue to be used for international development purposes that were continue to be counted as official development assistance. Okay. So there were internal financial structures to make sure not only the grants and contributions, but the FTEs, so that the same amount of operating expenditures were maintained for that purpose.
And speaking of the grants and contributions and the FTEs, one of the things that I'm hearing from civil society is that over the years, and this is not recent, this is over the last, say, decade, more and more it's not contribution agreements, but it's moving more toward contracts and short-term one-off. The length of time for project proposals to be approved is increasing, which of course these are the sorts of things that are very difficult for Canadian organizations. Often their staff are funded through the different projects. Very few of them have core funding. And having long-term, I'll go back to democratic development, very often you don't know what's going to happen in a country. So you might plan for electoral assistance, but the election is delayed. Or you might plan for a long-term parliamentary program, and then the parliament is dissolved, something happens. So really, and then in certain areas, you need to go in quickly. So, Venezuela right now would be an example where, there's a tremendous need very quickly. Sometimes it's less predictable even than that one. And so there have been suggestions made of having more long-term agreements, say 10-year agreements, which would be very flexible, which would allow rapid response within certain parameters, but allowing these Canadian organizations, which is another issue, is that I think that a lot of our support should be going to organizations that are based in Canada and local partners. But is there a way that we could move more toward providing the kind of long-term sustained support, particularly so organizations don't have staff and then they have a gap of 3 or 4 months and then they have to lay off the staff, bring the staff back because now they have another project? Is there a way to provide that kind of longevity, both because it's good for NGOs, but also because it's good for development assistance, where those partnerships, the local partnerships on the ground, especially in politics and democracy, the political partnerships that are made are so vitally important, and they're very easily lost if you withdraw from that country and then try to come back again. Is there a move toward that?
Yeah, so that was feedback that the department received very clearly through the Feminist International Assistance Policy consultations. It was very clear that our processes are can be complex and cumbersome on partners. And what we also want to do is make sure that, yes, our processes are streamlined, but we've done adequate due diligence at the same time. And so what we've been looking at over the last few months is to see if there are ways of balancing both of those objectives by lightening and streamlining the information that we request at once. Looking at the length of contribution agreements and how we amend them. We do know that in the types of contexts that we work in, things shift, costs shift, and so if we can do that in a more nimble fashion, but again, assure that when there is a dollar allocated, it does go to the intended recipient, and that we have those due diligence measures in place, that we are looking at those things very clearly. We've had consultations with NGOs and the Canadian NGO community to do that, and over the summer we will start rolling out some of those changes.
And with regard to RBM, the results-based management framework, I mean, obviously this is a very, very important accountability mechanism all across government. But when you're talking about development, it isn't necessarily always the most suitable accountability tool, because often, rather than showing that X amount of funding led to X result, you're not trying to achieve a result, you're trying to prevent things from getting more worse. So it may be that you've got the situation is here, it's about to go down here, and you make sure that it's gone here, as opposed to increasing and having a result to show for it. How do you prove a negative? How do you prove that without us, 40,000 more people would have starved, but now only 5,000 starved? I mean, to put it very, very bluntly, it's very hard in an RBM framework when you're working on the ground in a country on development, particularly, to necessarily be able to have all of those indicators and outcomes nicely aligned ahead of time and then within the timeframes. Is there a way to find an accountability mechanism? I agree, absolutely, we need to be accountable for the money. but something that in the field of development might be a little bit more flexible?
So we were talking earlier about some of the performance indicators, and underpin that is an enormous results framework, and we do have experts in results-based management at the project level, and they all roll up into the indicators that we publish in the departmental results report. So those indicators are consulted with the project officers, with the NGO, and so whether it is something that doesn't get worse or whether it's an aspirational type of goal, those all get built in. But again, I think we were looking very clearly at how do we make those, how do we track those results and make them meaningful in terms of our reporting, and to ensure that we deliver value through our development dollars.
Now, in terms of our bilateral assistance to UN agencies, so I'm thinking UNDP, UN Women, and other agencies, there are different ways that we can do that. I mean, one way is to basket funds. So, for instance, a number of countries, the UNDP will say we need this, and then a number of countries will put in a certain amount of money, and we contribute to that, which I actually think is an effective way for the UN, an effective way to be able to manage the funds. There's also direct bilateral assistance, and of course the core funding that goes to some of these agencies is vital to the agencies. I know UNDP, I think, has lost about 50% of its core funding. So having countries pick particular programs and say, well, and that of course what we like, because it gives us more flexibility to say we really like this particular gender program and this one, but where are we in terms of how we're providing that assistance?
I'll have to cut you off. I apologize.
Can they answer
But we're way over time, so I'm going to go to Madame Lavadière.
Merci beaucoup et j'aimerais continuer.
Thank you very much. I'd like to pick up on something that Ms. Vanden Belt mentioned regarding RBM, the results-based management, and say that I share her perspective. If many international partners manage to avoid a civil war, how do you calculate that in the results-based management? I know many people are concerned about processes that can be rather complicated, that often run the risk, as I like to say, of confusing accountability and accountancy. Those are two different things. So that really affects small organizations. For example, in northern Saskatchewan, that might be associated with a religious group or other. Do you have special mechanisms for small organizations?
Try to diversify the number of partners that we work with, especially with some of the smaller Canadian organizations and those ones in Saskatchewan and all over Canada that you're talking about. And we've tried to do two things. One is look at, you refer to it as a contract, but how we do the engagement with them in terms of the agreement. One of the things that we do is before they execute a project, we will often visit them in person to look at, here's how we expect money to be managed, here's how the results reporting that we're looking for. And the results reporting is customized to the initiative and to the deliverable. And so what we don't want to do is overburden an organization that either is a fledgling organization that may be starting. So that results are at the core of what we do, but we do try to accommodate the partner when we do establish those results.
Mais même au niveau des demandes de...
But even in terms of funding requests, I remember at a certain point there was a call for tenders. The guide on how to fill out the funding request was 46 pages long. When it's a 46-page guide, well, you can imagine. And for small organizations, it's very difficult. Has there been change in that area? And there's an idea going around to provide a type of basket to the provincial council. Each province or territory has its own international development council, so that they can distribute that money in their community Is that an idea that's been considered? I'm not saying it what needs to be done, but I know it's an idea that was going around.
That 46-page document was written by me. No, it wasn't. But as I said before, what we want to do is make sure that we enable organizations of all sizes to deliver on development projects and work with the department, but we don't overburden them unnecessarily. So we are looking at how do we streamline our requirements, how do we make them written in plain language, how do we look at our contribution agreements that we have with them and use standard contribution templates as much as possible so they're easy to follow, to do capacity building in initial visits with these organizations so they do understand our expectations, so when they fill in a report either on results or for a quarterly financial report that they're able to do that. With respect to provincial councils, I'm probably not the best place. That would be one of my colleagues who's not here, but we are working more with and targeting provincial councils to look at their members and to see how we can make our processes a little bit simpler and more easy to use so they can access and even work through some of those councils.
Dernière question et je reviens.
Last question. Once again, regarding what Ms. Vanden Belt mentioned, another issue is that oftentimes we ask these organizations, well, we don't provide core funding, but we ask these organizations to have a significant level of administration. So there's no core funding, but we expect them to provide detailed follow-up. For some organizations, it's problematic because between two projects, what do? Do they let people go or do they have to hire someone new? There's a whole learning curve. Is the Government of Canada reconsidering its policy of not providing core funding to organizations?
As a result of the policy, I think what we're looking at is how do we engage effectively with Canadian organizations in terms of how do we make it easier for them to interact with us as an organization, how do we simplify working with them. Again, so we do the fiduciary element, so that's the part that I know the best, and I know sometimes we impose a burden and costs on organizations when we can achieve the same outcome by allowing things to be done through web portals or being more standardized. So what we're trying to do is work with organizations in terms of how we fund them, the eligible costs that we fund, and do so in a manner that's much simpler so that they don't have as much, we don't impose that kind of burden on Canadian organizations as we have in the past.
But there's still no consideration of giving core funding to some...
Not that I'm aware of.
Thank you.
Mr. Sani, please.
Thank you very much for coming this afternoon. I just wanted to ask a question about something that I read in your departmental plan. It seems that... Sorry? Okay. If you look at the priority 2 of advancing Canada's feminist policy, it dovetails nicely into the SDG goal number 5. But one of the main points you have in that is that 50% of bilateral assistance in 2021 will be going to sub-Saharan Africa because you're tailoring the funding to the poorest. I'm just wondering, because when we look at sub-Saharan Africa, you see a lot of other players, either other countries, other NGOs, other CSOs. You look at La Francophonie, the UN, IMF, World Bank. There's a lot of entities that are working there. So my question is a bit broad, and that response is that if we're going to apply our efforts in that part of the world, how are we going to discriminate and make sure that where Canadian funding is going to be applied, Canadian programming is going to be applied? How are you going to discern which partners to work with, which ones not to work with, which countries to go into, which countries don't need the help, which countries need the help? How will you figure out those parameters and come up with some roadmap going forward, since 50% of the funding will be in that part of the world?
So in terms of, let me start by talking about partners. So we internally have a process of any partner that we work with, we vet them in terms of their capacity. We do a rigorous due diligence process to know, one, can they actually deliver on the project that we're going to fund or potentially fund, in terms of, do they have the financial capacity, do they have the technical expertise, do they have experience in countries, for example, if it's in a fragile environment. So any partner that we work with goes through a rigorous analysis to ensure that they can actually deliver on what it is, the project that's proposing. We also do, in any country that we work in, we do a lot of coordination with other donors so we don't trip all over each other. And every donor has their own priority areas. We have ours. This was clearly outlined by the minister. And so what we do is we ensure that where we allocate our development dollars is where we can make the greatest impact. So one, we look at where others are active and where we can either support or be complementary, or where our partners have expertise, whether that be in education or sexual health and reproductive rights or whatever area that is. So it's the partner, and then it's where we can make the greatest difference. And in terms of the countries, there are a number of indices and factors that go into the decision of where we work. But again, it's where can we make the greatest difference, where are the needs greatest. There's all sorts of indices about vulnerability, poverty indices and all those things. And all those are factors in terms of the countries in which we work.
How much time is left? Because I want to split it with Michelle.
Well, it is Mr. Jesnevsky's turn.
Okay.
Thank you. A quick couple of questions. How many election monitoring projects have we had in the last 2 years?
Unfortunately, I don't have that information.
If that could be provided to us, as well as the costs associated with those projects. But my assumption would be approximately, do you have an idea of what the cost would have been?
I unfortunately don't have a breakdown by
And if we could get those as a percentage of the overall CETA budget. And I'd like to come back to a previous question that referenced NDI, IRI. We spend billions upon billions on development aid, humanitarian aid, and quite rightly and correctly. Yet it seems we spend a very small fraction on the institution building that's required, or on building the institutions of democracy. And that speaks to addressing the root causes of conflict as opposed to dealing with the results. There used to be a structure that was put in place called Canada Corps back in 2005. I think it lasted till about 2006. Were there any assessments done on the effectiveness of the work of Canada Corps, which engaged quite directly in institution building and things such as election monitoring?
I would have to come back to you. I don't have any information on whether there's been evaluation of Canada Corps, but I can come back to you.
Sure, if you could provide that. And finally, I'm still having a hard time understanding what is the funding that's been earmarked, or has any funding been earmarked for election monitoring in the coming year?
Again, I don't have that information. I know that, so one of the priority areas is inclusive governance. And so I could roughly,
I
see
that.
It would be,
if you could
election,
please, if you could, more specifically to the question, if you could provide the committee with answers to those questions, it would be appreciated.
Absolutely.
Thank you.
Vandenbell, please.
Thank you. And going back to my previous line of questioning about some of the organizations, Canadian organizations, NGOs, we know a lot of the staff of those organizations. People who are working in humanitarian assistance in that field are women. And one of the things that I've been told by some of the women that are working in places like Care Canada and elsewhere is that under the contribution agreements or the contracts that they have with Global Affairs, they are not allowed, the employer is not allowed to fund any top-ups on parental leave. And a lot of these people are working for 10 years or more. They're long-term employees. But because of the nature of the agreement they have with the Government of Canada, they're not allowed to have the same kind of top-ups that other employers might wish to provide, and it's actually precluded. Can you tell me, first of all, if that's true, and if it is true, is there any interest in reviewing that?
So that issue came up, I think last year, and it was, I can't remember the organization that raised it with us, and we are reviewing our policy on that.
Okay, thank you very much for that. The other thing, in 2010, I was managing a global project for women, women in politics, and I had staff on 5 continents, and one of my regional coordinator for Sub-Saharan Africa Skyped me one day and said, "You Canadian women are hypocrites." And I sort of stood back and, what do you mean? She said, because we know that, she goes, I studied at McGill. I know that Canadian women have reproductive rights, but it's not good enough for us African women. And then she pointed out to a clinic in her hometown. It had been Canadian funded for 40 years. It was providing needed medical services in a conflict-affected area. It provided sexual and reproductive health support for young 14-year-old girls who'd been gang raped by militias. And because one of the things that that clinic offered was abortion services, they were actually cut by the Harper government. And that clinic, with almost no notification, after 40 years of working with Canada, they lost all of their health services because of that. What I'd like to know is, how is it that our government now, because we are very, very clear that we support women's reproductive health and choice, how are we rebuilding those broken relationships? How do you go into a village where the doctors lost their jobs, the nurses, the clinic shut down? How do you go back in there and open that clinic and ask them to trust us again? Is there a way that we can restore and rebuild that trust that people had in us, particularly women in developing countries?
I think with the announcement of the funding for sexual and reproductive health and rights, as well as the broadening of the definition of maternal, newborn, and child health, our development officers overseas, the ones that we have at headquarters, and our partners have been very active in the communities and countries in which we work to rebuild that trust and to ensure that the full suite of that programming is available. And I was in Mozambique a couple of years ago where those services were provided, and the community was very accepting of that. And so I think it will take time, but the work has begun over the last couple of years.
And I think our Minister Freeland's intervention yesterday will go a long way toward that. So the other thing that I wanted to bring up is this issue of interference in elections and in democratic stability by using technology, often by nefarious actors, sometimes state-backed actors. Are we looking at how to make sure that countries, that first of all Canada, that we have protections in terms of some of those organizations that might be based here in Canada, but how do we, when we're looking at development work, how do we counter some of the destabilizing impacts of organizations that might even be criminally funded, that might be trying to destabilize? Human rights defenders and democracy defenders are being attacked online. You've got journalists who the space for political dialogue is closing in many countries, and often it's not coming from that country, it's coming from outside, and it's being done through using technology. Are we looking at that when we look at our development assistance? Is there any thinking around that?
I think the thinking around that is probably a little bit broader. So in budget 2018, there was $16 million announced for cybersecurity. Okay. And an element of that is international. And so what Global Affairs will be doing is looking at coordinating international cyber activities. Mm-hmm. And looking at, and so there will be a dedicated unit to do that coordination internationally for us.
Thank you very much. Mr. Janis, please.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair. Thank you to the officials. I'll maybe start just on the issue of education. When Canada funds education abroad, What is our process, just in general, or supports education abroad? What's our process for engaging the curricular content? All of us are in favor of education, supporting education, but also there's a reality that sometimes messages that encourage division, demonization of minorities, actually happen in the context of schools and education infrastructure. So what's your process for trying to make sure Canadian dollars aren't connected to that? Does your department have any involvement in the direct creation of curriculum, writing curriculum, offering curricular tools to schools around the world?
So to the best of my knowledge, we don't have any involvement in direct creation. So when we do education funding, so one, we often work through large multilateral organizations such as Global Partnership for Education, where we are part of the governance and we oversee, we have a say in how the organization implements projects, for example, in education. We work with Canadian NGOs that are involved in education as well. As part of our due diligence, we look at what type of activities that they're doing to ensure that they are not indoctrination or something that are contrary to Canadian values. So that would be as part of the upfront due diligence in projects.
Do you think a Canadian public servant would directly review the materials that are being used, textbooks, that sort of thing, or would you defer that review to other organizations and partners?
That I would have to confirm, but in any project that we do, our project officers are responsible no matter what the subject area, whether it's education or health or environment. We have specialists that will, before we fund them, before I will sign them off as a CFO, they have to go through that technical review to ensure that they will achieve the development outcomes.
Right. So a technical review is one thing, right? I guess what I'm wondering is, to put it concretely, if there's a history textbook that's appearing in a public school in Pakistan, and there's questions about how that history textbook integrates a discussion of the history of minority communities, and that history textbook has Canadian dollars in it, would Canadian officials be reviewing the content of that textbook, or would the review be at a sort of step back, higher level, sort of more, overarching type of level?
I would have to confirm that for you, but I think to use your example, if there's risk of that happening, it's unlikely that would be the type of education intervention that we would fund. Right?
Okay.
We may fund we may fund other things other than textbooks, but we would like that we would look at those types of risks.
But even if you're funding things
funding
other
decision.
than textbooks, I would suggest that, the concern is still there. If you're funding classrooms where this content is being taught as well. So I understand there's some uncertainty, and fair enough. If this is an issue that you'd be open to following up and writing to the committee on, because it's one that I actually hear about from time to time from diaspora communities in Canada who have specific concerns about curricular content that we're funding as part of development assistance, and whether or not that's reflective of our values in every case.
Yeah, and so I know with certain partners, no matter what project, we do monitoring. So every project that we fund has a monitoring and evaluation component. So in flight of a project, we do the monitoring. So we ensure that, again, that the activities that we're funding are the ones that we ought to be funding. So, but I'd be more than pleased to follow up in writing.
Excellent. I think I've got about 50 seconds left. Can I just ask, what programs and how much money do you have in programs that funds Canadians to travel and volunteer abroad as part of a development assistance strategy?
Let me see. I may have it. So we do fund a volunteer program. We work with a number of organizations for that. 20. I'll just see if I have the numbers here with me, but that's something that we could pull out for you. If I don't have it on hand, I'm more than happy to provide it.
Excellent.
To you.
Yeah, I'd be interested in either that now or at a later point.
Go to Mr. Poilievre, our special guest.
Here. Thank you very much. I have a question about the results-based approach you take. Something I looked at a lot when I was employment minister. And I just want to know how is it that we ensure that organizations that get results-based funding don't sign themselves up to deliver results that were going to happen anyway?
So we haven't used a results-based funding mechanism in the sense of a pay-for-results kind of framework. We will, as part of new ways of approaching international development, I think that's something that we're exploring, and we do know that our American counterparts do that, and we're trying to learn from them and from the British and others. Anytime we do make a development investment, we want to make sure that the results are additional. And so if the results were going to materialize, and that's part of the evaluation going into the funding of a project, that they do have to actually move the needle forward or avoid a deterioration of results. So there has to be some kind of incremental impact before funding is allocated.
So do you provide performance pay to or NGOs at all?
We do not.
And what is the reason for that?
We have had very little experience doing that. So that's something over the last year we've looked at new innovative approaches, and results-based payment schedules is one of them. We haven't had many proponents who say, well, here's something that we could do results-based funding. We have worked with your former department on some of the things that they've done to learn from where they've used either social impact bonds or other results-based mechanisms, see how that applies in the development context. We just haven't had the opportunity to implement that as of yet.
Okay, thanks.
Thank you very much. Colleagues, that'll wrap up our session with the officials. I want to say thank you very much. We're going to stay, you don't have to run up, but you can. We're going to do some work that's not out of camera, obviously, and that deals with the votes that we will do now. And then we'll go to Mr. Aboutif's notice of motion. And then we got one or two other things to do, but very shortly, depending on how it all goes. So as per how the estimates work, I will read it out for you. And it says, shall vote 1 under Department of Foreign Affairs, Trade and Development, carry. All those in favor? Carry. Shall vote 5 under Department of Foreign Affairs, Trade and Development, carry. Carry. Vote 10. Shall vote 10 under Department of Foreign Affairs, Trade and Development, carry.
On division.
Carry. Shall vote 15 under Department of Foreign Affairs, Trade and Development, carry.
On division.
Carry. Shall vote 20 under Department of Foreign Affairs, Trade and Development, carry.
On division.
Carry. Shall vote L25 under Department of Foreign Affairs, Trade and Development, carry.
On division.
Carry. Shall vote 1 under International Development Research Center, carry.
On division.
Carry. Shall vote 1 under International Joint Commission Canadian Section, carry.
On division.
Carry. Shall I report main estimates 2016, 2018, 2019 to the House?
On division. On division.
Carried. Thank you very much. That was the hard part for today. Now I'd like to go to Mr. Aboutif's notice of motion. He'd like to present it to committee with no debate, as it is a notice of motion. And there will be no debate as it relates to this, because I understand there's no unanimous consent to waive the notice of motion. So I turn the floor over to you.
I believe a copy of the motion was distributed to all members, and the motion says that the committee first recognized that there is an urgent need to bridge the humanitarian development divide that prevents quality education services from being delivered to millions out-of-school children in the most volatile regions in the world. 2, note that girls are 2.5 times more likely to be out of school than boys in countries affected by crisis due to the persistence of gender inequality and the additional barriers that girls face in accessing quality education. 3, believes that Canada should include a focus on girls' education and empowerment as an important theme of the 2018 G7 Summit, June 8 to 9 in Charlevoix, Quebec. 4, acknowledges that the lasting, non-partisan commitment of the Government of Canada to improving access to education for women and girls throughout the developing world. And then the committee reports that to the House of Commons to be adopted as a motion. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Ablatif. After the 48 hours, generally speaking, at the next meeting, we'll have an opportunity to move that motion, debate it, and then the committee will decide. Thank you for that.
Thank you.
The next order of business is, we'll just waive that. People can hear about our motion on the Ukrainian delegation's hospitality motion is required. It's fine. That the clerk of the committee make the necessary arrangements for an informal breakfast meeting on Tuesday, May 12, 2018, with a delegation from Ukraine. I need a motion to approve.
I suggest culturally appropriate food, cabbage rolls.
I've already made arrangements for that. All those in favor of the motion, please.
In favor.
Approved. Okay. Last point that all members would be interested in. The AG, the Auditor General, is not available, and so the decision has been taken that we'll invite him because we won't be able to get the full report completed under the time that we have allotted. So we'll move this to the fall and have a meeting with the AG and then complete the report then. Just wanted you to know that the days that we tried to fit it into our already busy schedule just didn't work, so it'll have to wait till the fall. Okay, so I wanted to inform you of that. We've attempted to have that work. Other than that, I think that's all there is for the business of today. Thank you very much, and meeting is adjourned.